For 20 years, I gave my son everything. A six-figure education, cars, a life without worry. All built on the memory of his mother. 2 weeks ago, he asked for $5,000. I said no. In return, he decided my life was a fair price to pay for his inheritance. This is the story of how I gave him exactly what he deserved. This is a story about betrayal at its deepest level. If you're ready to see justice served, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. The smell of old oil, hot metal, and hard-working rubber is a strange kind of comfort. But it's been the backdrop to my life for 2 decades. It's the smell of honesty, of tangible problems you can diagnose, fix with your own 2 hands, and then watch drive away. Better than they were before. I was standing under the bright, sterile lights of Bay 2. My fingers, permanently stained with the ghost of yesterday's grease, tracing the clean, silver line of a newly welded exhaust pipe on a vintage Ford Mustang. This first shop, the one I built from a foundation of debt and sheer will, remains my sanctuary. Even after the business grew into a chain of 6 reliable garages across Seattle, it's the only place that still feels entirely mine. My gaze, as it often does, drifted to the corner of the workshop, past the neatly organized racks of tools to a grease-smudged corkboard. Tacked right in the center is a faded photograph of my wife, Elara. She's laughing in the picture, her head thrown back in pure joy. The afternoon sun of a long-gone summer, catching the golden flecks in her brown hair. We were camping in the Cascades. A year before our son, Tyler, came along and changed our world. And a decade before the cancer came and shattered it, everything I have now, the shops, the comfortable house, the portfolio I rarely look at, was built on a promise I made to her in a sterile, white hospital room that smelled of antiseptic, wilting flowers, and a quiet, creeping despair. I can still feel the memory of it, as sharp as a fresh wound. The sterile air, the almost silent squeak of a nurse's shoes in the hallway, the rhythmic, electronic beep of the heart monitor that had become the metronome of our final days together. Her hand in mine was impossibly frail, yet her grip was firm, urgent. Her voice, once so full of life, was a fragile whisper against the low hum of the machinery keeping her with me. "Take care of our boy, Leon," she'd said, her eyes pleading. "He's a good kid. Just make sure he has the life we always dreamed of. Protect him." That promise became my blueprint, my religion. It was the fuel for the 16-hour days, and the reason I ate countless dinners alone, hunched over paperwork at the shop's front desk. It was all for Tyler. And I kept my promise. Or at least, I thought I did. I protected him from struggle, from want, from any hint of the hardship I had known. I paid for the best private schools, the kind with ivy on the walls and tuition fees that could buy a small house in the suburbs. By the time he limped across the finish line with a business degree he'd never use, I'd spent over $250,000 on his education alone. When he turned 21, a sensible sedan wasn't good enough. He'd researched for weeks, showing me brochures for a metallic black BMW 4 Series. Pointing out the trim packages and engine specs with a passion I'd never seen him apply to his studies. He got it. The upscale apartment in Belltown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Puget Sound, I co-signed the lease and wrote the check for the security deposit and the first 6 months' rent, trying to ignore the condescending way he spoke to the building manager, as if the man were his personal servant. I never saw these things as enabling him. I saw them as fulfilling my vow to Elara. I believed, with the blind faith of a grieving husband, that if I constructed a world for him free of obstacles, he would naturally grow into a happy, successful, and appreciative man. I wasn't just wrong, I was a fool. The office door slammed open with a force that rattled the glass in its frame and sent a stack of invoices fluttering to the floor. It wasn't a customer. It was Tyler. He strode in, his expensive leather jacket looking absurdly out of place against the backdrop of worn-out tires and engine blocks. His face was a thundercloud, his jaw tight. He didn't say hello. A faint, sour smell of whiskey hung about him, a scent that was becoming increasingly familiar. He threw a crumpled piece of paper onto my cluttered desk. It skidded across a greasy invoice and stopped against my coffee mug. It was a credit card statement. The final balance circled in angry red ink. I need $5,000. Dad. By tomorrow. It wasn't a request, it was a decree. His voice was laced with a hard, entitled arrogance that grated on my ears like sand in an engine. I took a slow breath, wiping my hands on a red shop rag before picking up the statement. My hands were steady, but a sudden, cold knot was twisting itself tight in the pit of my stomach. I scanned the charges: expensive restaurants, online stores I'd never heard of, cash advances. I looked at him and calmly asked what the emergency was this time. He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a point just over my shoulder, mumbling about a can't miss investment opportunity a friend had clued him in on. He said it was time-sensitive. I'd heard that exact line 3 months ago. That time, the investment turned out to be a weekend in Vegas. I felt a slow, hot flush creep up my neck. It wasn't about the money. $5,000 was a transmission rebuild and a new set of brakes. It was the look on his face, or rather, the lack of a look. There was no shame, no gratitude, no hint of acknowledgement for the lifetime of support that had led to this moment. He saw me not as his father, but as an obstacle to a gatekeeper to the funds he believed were rightfully his. My hand, the one resting on the desk, curled into a fist. I consciously uncurled it, finger by finger. I thought of Elara, of a happy little boy on a tricycle, and the anger gave way to a profound, weary sadness. In a quiet, even voice, I told him no. I told him that the bank of Dad was closed. I said that I loved him, but that this wasn't love. It was a crutch, and it was time he learned to walk on his own 2 feet. The change was instantaneous. The thin veneer of civility evaporated, and the raw, ugly resentment underneath boiled over. His face contorted with a rage that was genuinely shocking. "It's always the same with you, isn't it?" he snarled. Taking a step closer, his body radiated a hostile energy that made the small office feel suffocating. "You sit on your piles of money, preaching about responsibility from your greasy little kingdom." And then he delivered the words that would sever the last remaining thread of the bond I thought we had. He looked me straight in the eye, and with a chilling clarity, he said, "You know what? Just keep your damn money. I bet I'll manage it a hell of a lot better when you're dead." He spun on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the mechanic on duty plaque Elara had painted for me years ago fell from its hook and clattered to the floor. The silence he left behind was a physical weight. It pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. The familiar smells of the shop no longer felt like comfort. They smelled like my failure. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. The echo of his words branded into my mind. Sleep was impossible that night. The house, usually a place of quiet refuge, felt cavernous and hostile. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an accusation. His words played on an endless, vicious loop. When you're dead. When you're dead. Around 2 a.m. I gave up, went downstairs to my study, and poured a measure of bourbon I didn't drink. I just sat there, swirling the amber liquid in the glass. Finally, I opened my laptop. My fingers moved with a will of their own, typing the name of my family lawyer, John Abernathy, into the search bar. His office number glowed on the screen. I picked up my cell phone, manually entered the digits, and saved the contact. I stared at his name on the screen for a full minute, my thumb hovering over the call button. I couldn't bring myself to press it. Not yet. But saving the number felt like a shift, a small but significant acknowledgement that something was irrevocably broken. Several days of tense, suffocating silence passed. Then, one evening, my doorbell rang. It was Tyler. The aggressive posture was gone, replaced by a practiced, theatrical remorse. He was holding a six-pack of my favorite IPA, a peace offering. He apologized profusely, claiming he was under a lot of pressure, that he was scared about his future and had taken it out on me. He said all the right things, his voice filled with a sorrow that seemed almost genuine. He looked so much like his mother in that moment, with the same earnest eyes she had when she was trying to convince me of something, that the cynical, wounded part of my brain was shouted down by the desperate, hopeful father who wanted to believe. Then he laid his trap. Though I didn't see it as one at the time, he suggested a trip, just the two of us. A real adventure. We would go camping in Denali National Park in Alaska, a place we'd talked about visiting since he was a boy obsessed with grizzly bears. It would be a way to reconnect, he said, his voice soft and pleading. He reminded me of a fishing trip we took to Lake Chelan when he was 10. How I'd taught him to cast how we'd laughed when he caught a boot. He was weaponizing my own nostalgia against me. My mind screamed with warnings. It replayed his venomous words from the shop, but my heart, my stupid, lonely, grieving father's heart, saw a lifeline. It saw a chance, however slim, to pull my son back from the edge. The deep-seated need to fulfill my promise to Elara, to believe that her son was still in there somewhere, was a powerful current. It pulled me under, drowning out the quieter, wiser voice of caution. After he left, I walked through the quiet house, the silence feeling less like an accusation and more like a possibility. I found an old photo album. Flipping to a picture of the three of us on that long-ago fishing trip, Tyler was beaming, holding up a tiny trout, his face a perfect picture of innocence. I closed the album. I would go. I would give him this one last chance to be the son I remembered, the son Elara had believed in. The decision, once made, settled into a fragile kind of peace. For 2 weeks, I threw myself into the preparations, a welcome distraction from the echoing silence in my house. I bought new gear, a lightweight, 2-man tent, sub-zero sleeping bags, a state-of-the-art GPS unit with a satellite messenger function. Tyler, for his part, played the role of the prodigal son to perfection. He called to check in. He asked my opinion on which hiking boots to buy. He seemed genuinely excited, and his enthusiasm was infectious. Slowly papering over the ugly cracks his words had left in my heart, I allowed myself to believe. The flight to Anchorage was smooth. We rented a heavy-duty pickup truck, the kind with tires that looked like they could climb a sheer rock face. As we drove north toward Denali, a vast, intimidating wilderness unfolded around us. The mountains, jagged and capped with ancient snow, didn't feel welcoming. They felt indifferent. Titanic forces that had existed long before me and would remain long after I was gone. The raw scale of it was humbling. I pointed out a bald eagle soaring in the distance. But Tuller just grunted, his attention fixed on his phone, his thumb swiping endlessly. He'd been quiet and sullen since we landed. A stark contrast to his manufactured excitement in Seattle. No signal out here, he finally muttered, shoving the phone into his jacket pocket with a frustrated sigh. At the park entrance, we stopped at the ranger station to register our backcountry route. Tyler was the one who spoke, confidently laying out a plan for a 4-day trek along a trail I'd never heard of, the Wickersham Wall approach. He called it the Ranger. A woman with a kind, weathered face and sharp eyes raised an eyebrow. She unfolded a large topographical map, her finger tracing a faint, dotted line through a deep green, roadless section of the park. That's an aggressive route. Fellas, she said, her tone professional but laced with caution. It's not one of our maintained trails. No bridges over the glacial streams, and you'll be in prime grizzly and wolf territory. You experienced. I spoke up, mentioning my military background and our past camping trips, perhaps embellishing our experience a little to sound more competent. Tyler just nodded impatiently. The ranger gave us a long, searching look before reluctantly stamping our permit. All right then, she said, handing it over. Pack a flare gun. Make noise on the trail. And store your food in a bear canister 100 yards from your tent. No exceptions. The wildlife here isn't afraid of people. As we drove deeper into the park, the paved road gave way to gravel. We passed signs, bright yellow diamonds with stark black silhouettes. One showed a hulking bear. The next, a howling wolf. Underneath, the text was simple and chilling, warning high-density bear and wolf activity. Travel at your own risk. A cold knot of unease tightened in my gut. This felt different from our trips in the Cascades. This felt serious. I glanced over at Tyler, but his face was a blank mask. He was just staring out the window, his jaw set. Again, I pushed the feeling down. I was a veteran. I was an experienced outdoorsman. I was letting a sign spook me. I was being foolish. We hiked for 6 hours that first day, into a landscape so profoundly silent, it felt like it had a physical weight. The only sounds were the crunch of our boots on the rocky trail, our own ragged breathing, and the distant whistle of the wind coming down from the high peaks. Tyler set a grueling pace, always 10 yards ahead, never looking back to see if I was keeping up. When we finally made camp, it was in a small clearing by a fast-moving, slate-gray river. The water so cold it hurt your teeth to drink it. That night, the temperature plummeted. We sat by a crackling campfire, the flames pushing back a wall of immense, impenetrable darkness. I tried to bridge the distance between us. I brought up old memories. I asked about his plans for the future. He answered in monosyllables, his eyes fixed on the hypnotic dance of the flames. Your mom would have loved this, I said quietly, the words feeling small and inadequate in the vast emptiness, the quiet, the stars. He didn't look at me. He just poked the fire with a long stick, sending a shower of sparks up into the darkness. Yeah, he said, his voice flat. Maybe. We sat in silence for another hour after that. I eventually gave up and retreated to the tent, the cold seeping deep into my bones. A cold that had nothing to do with the Alaskan air. I woke before dawn. It wasn't a sound that woke me, but the sudden, intense chill. The fire had died down to a bed of pale, glowing embers. A sliver of moon cast a ghostly light over the campsite, and in that light, I saw him. Tyler was moving with a quiet, systematic efficiency. He was packing, but he wasn't packing his gear. He was packing all of it. I watched, my mind struggling to process the scene. He took the GPS unit from the pouch where we'd stored it. He took the water filter, the first aid kit, the small canister of bear spray. He emptied the bear-proof food container, transferring all the dehydrated meals and energy bars into his own oversized backpack, and then I saw him pick up the one item that sent a jolt of pure ice through my veins, the bright orange flare gun. He checked the chamber, then tucked it deep into a side pocket of his pack. I pushed myself out of my sleeping bag, my movements stiff and clumsy. My voice was a croak. "Tyler, what are you doing?" He didn't startle. He simply stopped what he was doing and turned to face me. The moonlight bleached all the color from his face, leaving a cold, marble-like sculpture. There was no remorse in his eyes. No conflict. There was nothing. It was the face of a stranger. "I'm tired of waiting," he said, his voice as calm and dead as the frozen landscape around us. The words didn't make sense. It was like my brain refused to compute their meaning. Waiting for what? What are you talking about? I took a step toward him, my hands outstretched. He took a step back, his hand resting near the canister of bear spray on his belt. The gesture was a clear, unmistakable warning. It was then that the full, horrifying reality of the situation crashed down on me. The remote trail, the ranger's warning, the dismissive attitude, the $5,000, the rage, it was all a plan. It clicked into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid shutting. My breath hitched in my chest. I felt the blood drain from my face. A didzing, ringing sound filling my ears. This wasn't happening. My son. My boy. Elara's son. He wouldn't. He couldn't. He seemed to read the thoughts on my face. He zipped up his backpack, hoisted it onto his shoulders, and took a few steps back toward the trail. Then he reached into his pocket and tossed something at my feet. It was a single, foil-wrapped granola bar. A final, cruel insult. He looked at me. One last time. His expression utterly blank. And then he said the words that will be seared into my memory until the day I truly die. "Goodbye. Dad, meet the bears." And then he turned and walked away. I stood there, frozen, unable to move or speak. I listened to the sound of his footsteps, the steady crunch, crunch, crunch on the gravelly earth, growing fainter and fainter until they were swallowed by the immense, predatory silence of the wilderness. And then I was alone. For how long I stood there, I don't know. Time seemed to stop. The shock was a physical blanket, numbing my limbs, my thoughts, my very soul. But as the first pale light of dawn began to illuminate the jagged peaks to the east, another feeling began to push through the shock, the cold. A deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with grief. It was the simple, brutal cold of survival. And with it, something deep inside me, something I thought I'd buried 25 years ago, began to stir. The training, my mind cleared. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, Sharp-edged focus. Assess. Orient. Move. My military training took over. A series of protocols drilled into me so deeply, they were instinct. I assessed my situation: no food, no shelter, no navigation, no way to make fire. I was wearing hiking clothes. But they wouldn't be enough when night fell again. I was, for all intents and purposes, a dead man. I oriented myself. I looked at the rising sun. East. I remembered the map from the ranger station. The main park road was far to the south, but a smaller access road, used by maintenance crews and rangers, was to the west. My only chance. I would go west. And so I began to move. I followed the riverbank at first. Knowing it was my only source of water, I walked with a steady, determined pace. Conserving energy, I followed the game trails, the narrow paths worn into the earth by animals over centuries. They knew the land, the path of least resistance. The cold gnawed at me, and a gnawing hunger began to twist in my stomach. Every snapped twig in the dense brush, every shadow that moved in my peripheral vision, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I was no longer a father. I was prey. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, but its warmth was a lie, offering no real defense against the chilling wind. My legs ached. My throat was raw. Despair was a patient hunter, stalking me, whispering in my ear that it was hopeless, that I should just lie down and let it be over. I thought of Elara. I thought of my promise, and I thought of Tyler's face, cold and empty in the moonlight, and the despair was burned away by a clean, hard flame of pure rage. I would not die here. I would not give him the satisfaction. It was late in the afternoon when I heard it. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A low, mechanical growl, intermittent, carried on the wind. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a plane. It was an engine. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through me. I scrambled up a small ridge, my lungs burning, and scanned the valley below. There, a flash of movement, 2 of them, ATVs. They were moving away from me. A mile distant. Maybe more. I gathered every last ounce of strength I had. I put my fingers in my mouth and let out the piercingly loud whistle I hadn't used since my army days. It was weak. Pathetic. I tried again. And then I just screamed, "Araf!" Ragged sound torn from the depths of my being. A sound of pure, desperate survival. "Hey, over here, help!" The lead ATV stopped. I saw a figure turn, stand up on the footrests, and raise a pair of binoculars. I waved my arms frantically. A wild, ridiculous dance on the side of a desolate mountain. I saw the figure point in my direction. The second ATV stopped. And then, impossibly, they turned. They were coming toward me. They reached me 10 minutes later. The lead rider, a man about my age with a thick gray beard and a face carved from granite, shut off his engine. He swung his leg over the seat, his eyes taking in my torn jacket, my chattering teeth, my exhausted state. He unstrapped a thermos from his rack. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his voice a low rumble. He handed me the thermos. It was filled with hot, sweet tea. The warmth spread through my chest like a fire being lit in a cold, dark room. I drank it down, barely stopping for breath. "What in God's name happened to you out here?" he asked, his eyes sharp and analytical. Between shuddering breaths, the story came pouring out. I told him everything. My son. The plan. The gear. The final, cruel words. As I spoke, the man's expression shifted from professional concern to stunned disbelief, and then to a hard, cold fury that mirrored my own. He introduced himself as Jack Evans, a former park ranger who now ran ATV tours. He looked back in the direction I had come from, then looked at the path ahead. He pulled a radio from his jacket. Then he looked at me, a new, dangerous glint in his eye. "That son of a bitch," he said, his voice low and guttural. "He'll take the main trail back. It'll take him another 5 hours to reach the trailhead, then an hour's drive back to the lodge." He looked at his partner, then back at me. "We know a shortcut through the valley. We'll get you back to that lodge before he does." The journey back wasn't a rescue, it was a counter-offensive. I sat behind Jack on the lead ATV. The machine's throaty roar, a stark contrast to the profound silence of the wilderness that had, only an hour before, been my prison. The wind was a physical thing, a betrayal, cleansing force that tore at my face and whipped tears from my eyes. But I wasn't cold anymore. A fire had been lit inside me. A furnace fueled not by the hot, chaotic burn of immediate rage, but by the cold, hard clarity of purpose. My son had tried to murder me. He had looked me in the eye and sentenced me to death. He had judged my life, the one I had dedicated to him, to be worth less than a number in a bank account. As the ATV bounced and skidded over the rugged Point Bandstad Commandersers, hidden trail that Jack navigated with an expert's instinct, my grief for the boy I had lost was incinerated, leaving behind the hardened steel of resolve. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, and I was about to become a predator. We arrived at the sprawling, rustic chic lodge. An hour later, the parking lot was mostly empty, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows from the towering pines. Tyler's rented pickup was nowhere in sight. We had time. Jack led me straight to my room, his keycard swiping us in. The room was exactly as I'd left it, 2 queen beds, a generic painting of a mountain above a gas fireplace that had never seen a real log, and a small balcony overlooking the woods. It felt absurdly normal, a sterile stage for the drama that was about to unfold. It was no longer a hotel room, it was a makeshift command center. While I took a scalding hot shower that felt like it was peeling away layers of shock and hypothermia, Jack made some calls. I came out of the bathroom wrapped in a thick, white towel, feeling almost human again, to find him sitting at the small desk, a grim look on his face. He'd laid out a small, black device on the polished wood surface. "I have a friend in the local state trooper detachment," he said, his voice low. I told him a sanitized version, that we found a hiker in severe distress, possibly the victim of a violent crime in the backcountry, and that the person responsible might be returning here. I gave him your name and your son's. "They're on standby. They won't act until we call them with confirmation." I nodded, my mind racing, piecing together the next steps. The anger was still there, a cold, heavy weight in my chest, but my thoughts were clear, methodical. This couldn't be messy. It had to be precise. It had to be undeniable. It had to be legal. "There's one more thing I need to do," I said. I pulled my cell phone from the pocket of my hiking pants I'd left on the chair. The battery was almost dead, but it had enough life. I found the contact I had saved just a couple of weeks ago. A lifetime ago. John Abernathy, Milavir. My hand was rock steady as I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and professional. John, it's Leon Harper. I said, my own voice sounding distant, devoid of emotion. I know it's late in the day, but I need you to confirm something for me. And it's urgent. I could hear the rustle of papers on his end. Of course. Leon, is everything all right? You sound. I'm fine. I cut him off, not wanting to get into it. I just need you to confirm the status of the amendment to my will, the one we executed last week. Ah, yes, he said. The full transfer of assets upon your death. Let me see. Yes. It was signed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk's office 2 days ago. It is ironclad and effective immediately. As per your instructions, your entire estate, excluding a small personal fund, will be transferred to the Elara Harper Scholarship Fund for aspiring mechanics. And Tyler's inheritance, I asked. The name, feeling like ash in my mouth. There was a slight pause. As per your explicit instructions, he is named, but he is to receive $1 to legally demonstrate he was not forgotten, but intentionally disinherited. Leon, if I may ask, what is this about? Thank you, John. That's all I needed to know, I said, and ended the call before he could ask any more questions. I looked at Jack. A crucial piece was in place. Tyler had tried to kill me for a fortune that was no longer his. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. Jack pushed the small black device across the desk toward me. It was no bigger than my thumb. Digital voice recorder. He explained. Battery lasts for 24 hours. It's voice activated. He pointed to a single, tiny red light on its side. When it's on, that light will blink once every 10 seconds, almost invisible in the right spot. We spent the next 10 minutes preparing the stage. Jack, with the practical ingenuity of a man who spent his life in the wild, found the perfect spot. He used a strip of black electrical tape from his ATV's toolkit to affix the recorder to the back of the flat-screen television, tucked away amidst the tangle of cables. Its tiny microphone pointing directly at the small seating area with its 2 plush armchairs. We tested it. It was perfect. The plan is simple, Jack said, his eyes meeting mine. You sit. You wait. You let him talk. People like him. They're arrogant. They think they're smarter than everyone else. When he sees you, he's going to panic. And he's going to talk his way into a corner. I'll be in the adjoining room. The door will be unlocked. The moment he incriminates himself, I'll call my friend. And they'll be here in 5 minutes. He handed me a spare keycard to his room. Don't confront him. Don't yell. Just let him hang himself with his own words. He gave my shoulder a firm squeeze and then left, disappearing into the room next door. I was alone again. I walked over to the window and looked out. A light snow had begun to fall. Thick, heavy flakes drifting down, coating the dark green pines in a layer of pristine white. The world outside was being buried, softened, its sharp edges disappearing under a blanket of silence. It was beautiful, and it felt like a funeral. I wasn't waiting for a monster. I was waiting for my son. I sat there, in one of the armchairs, and the full weight of what I was about to do settled on me, and what settled on me, this wasn't a moment of triumph. There was no satisfaction here, just a hollow, profound grief. I was mourning the death of the boy I had raised, The laughing child in the faded photographs. The teenager I had taught to drive. That boy was gone, replaced by the cold-eyed stranger who had left me to die. I was about to be the instrument of that stranger's destruction, and it felt like I was destroying the last piece of my own heart in the process. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I saw Elara's face, smiling at me from the corkboard in the shop. Protect him, she had said. Maybe this, in its own terrible way, was the only way I could. An hour passed. Then another. The snow was coming down harder now. Finally, I heard it. The heavy crunch of tires in the snow-covered parking lot, the slam of a truck door. A few minutes later, the confident, heavy tread of footsteps in the hallway. Then, the electronic jangle of the keycard being inserted into the lock on my door. The door swung open, and he was there. Tyler. He was covered in a light dusting of snow, his cheeks flushed from the cold. He was whistling. A cheerful, tuneless sound. He kicked the snow from his boots with an arrogant swagger, dropped his oversized backpack to the floor with a heavy thud, and stretched his arms over his head like a man who had just finished a satisfying day's work. He turned, a self-satisfied smirk on his face, ready to enjoy the spoils of his empty room. And then he saw me. He froze mid-stretch. The smirk evaporated, replaced by a mask of pure, slack-jawed shock. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. His eyes, wide with disbelief and a dawning, primal fear, were locked on mine. I didn't move. I just sat there in the armchair, watching him. I let the silence stretch, letting it fill the room, letting it suffocate him. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and steady. A dead, even tone that held no anger, no sorrow, just a flat, chilling finality. You look surprised to see me, Tyler. He flinched as if I had struck him. He finally found his voice. A strangled, high-pitched stammer. Dad, what? How did you get here? I just looked at him, my expression unchanging. I didn't answer his question. I just waited. The silence was my weapon now, and I wielded it with precision. He started to babble, the words tumbling over each other in a frantic, desperate torrent. I went to get help. The trail was washed out further down. I knew you couldn't make it, so I ran ahead to get a ranger. I was coming back for you. I swear I was so worried. The lies were pathetic. So poorly constructed, they were almost laughable. He was flailing, drowning, and pulling his own story under with him. You were worried, I repeated, my voice still flat, betraying nothing. That's why you took the GPS, and the food, and the flare gun, to get help. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, an excuse, anything. Yes, I needed the gear to move faster, to show the rangers on the map where you were. I was doing it for you. He took a step into the room, his hands held up in a placating gesture, the picture of a concerned son. Dad, you have to believe me. I wouldn't. I could never just leave you. I let him finish. I let the last, desperate lie hang in the air between us. And then I leaned forward, just slightly, and delivered the final blow. Then tell me this, Tyler, if you were going to get help, why were you whistling when you came through that door? And why did you say it? Why did you say, meet the bears? The color that was left in his face vanished. His carefully constructed world of lies collapsed in an instant. The mask of the concerned son didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces, revealing the raw, ugly thing that had been hiding underneath all along. His face twisted into a snarl of pure, undiluted rage, the same rage I had seen in my office. "Because you deserved it," he screamed, the sound echoing in the silent room. "You and your damn money, always holding it over my head, judging me. It was just money. You have a fortune. And you wouldn't give me a pathetic $5,000. It was my inheritance. I was just taking it a little early." He had said it. He had confessed everything. The motive, the intent, the utter, chilling lack of remorse. It was all there, hanging in the air, captured by the tiny, blinking red light behind the television. And at that exact moment, as the last of his shouted words faded, there was a loud, authoritative knock at the door, connecting to the adjoining room. Before I could even move, the door opened. Jack stepped in, and behind him, filling the doorway, were two uniformed state troopers, their expressions grim and professional. Tyler spun around, his mouth agape, his confession turning to ash on his tongue. Jack didn't look at Tyler. He looked at me, then gestured with his chin toward the television. One of the troopers stepped forward, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Tyler Harper," he said, his voice a calm, implacable force that cut through the tension in the room. "You're under arrest for attempted murder." The words attempted murder hung in the air, heavy and absolute. They seemed to suck all the sound and energy from the room. For a moment, Tyler was a statue of disbelief, his mind refusing to process the reality crashing down upon him. The rage on his face collapsed, replaced by a wave of pure, uncomprehending panic. His eyes darted from the troopers to Jack, and then finally to me. In them, I saw a flicker of a pleading child, the last ghost of the boy he used to be, begging me to fix this, to make it go away like I had fixed every other problem in his life. But that man, the fixer, the enabler, was gone. He had died somewhere in the frozen Alaskan wilderness. The collapse was total. He didn't resist. His body went limp as the second trooper stepped forward, turned him around, and expertly secured his wrists behind his back with a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click-clack of the cuffs locking into place was a sound of shocking finality. All the fight went out of him. He started to babble, a string of incoherent denials and pleas. "No. You don't understand. It was a mistake. A misunderstanding. Dad, tell them, it's a mistake." I remained silent. I was a spectator now. This was a machine he had set in motion, and I was simply watching it run its course. They read him his rights, the familiar words sounding surreal in the cozy confines of the hotel room. He was no longer my son. He was a suspect, a perpetrator, a case file in the making. As they led him out of the room, he looked over his shoulder at me one last time. The anger was gone. The pleading was gone. All that was left was a hollow, empty hatred. It was the look of a cornered animal, blaming the trapper, not its own foolishness. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and the only sounds were the fading footsteps in the hallway and the soft, insistent whisper of the snow falling outside the window. The moment the door closed, a breath I didn't know I was holding escaped my lungs in a long, shuddering sigh. My body, which had been rigid with adrenaline, suddenly felt immensely heavy, as if gravity had doubled its pull. The strength that had sustained me for the past 24 hours drained away, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep weariness. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no surge of satisfaction. No thrill of revenge served cold. There was only a vast silence. Jack walked over and quietly retrieved the digital recorder from behind the television, switching it off before handing it to the lead trooper, who had stayed behind to take our formal statements. The legal proceedings that followed were a grim, methodical affair. Back in Anchorage, I gave my statement, a detailed, chronological account of events, my voice a monotone that betrayed none of the emotion churning beneath the surface. Jack gave his, corroborating my condition and the time and place he found me, and then there was the recording. It was the linchpin, the undeniable proof. Tyler's own words, his own rage-filled confession, sealed his fate more securely than any testimony ever could. He was appointed a public defender who tried to argue that the confession was coerced, that he was under duress. But the recording was clean. My voice was calm. His was the one screaming. There was no defense. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, he took a plea bargain rather than face a jury. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in a state penitentiary with the possibility of parole in 20 years. He would be 45 when he got out. A middle-aged man whose entire youth had been consumed by the consequences of a single, monstrous act of greed. I returned to Seattle a different man. The city was the same. The familiar gray skies and the smell of rain on pavement. But I was a stranger in my own life. The big house felt less like a home and more like a museum of a family that no longer existed. The auto shops, once my pride and my sanctuary, now felt like a monument to a misguided promise. They were the engine that had fueled Tyler's sense of entitlement, the fortune that had warped his soul. I couldn't bear to be there anymore. So I made a decision. I called my lawyer, John Abernathy, and instructed him to begin the process of selling the business. I sold the house, too, and bought a small, modest condo overlooking the water in a quieter part of the city. I kept enough to live comfortably. But the rest, the vast majority of the fortune I had spent a lifetime building, now had a new purpose. True to the changes I had made to my will, I established the Elara Harper Scholarship Fund, an endowment dedicated to helping underprivileged and at-risk youth get technical training and certification at vocational schools across Washington state. I would give them the start I had given my own son, but I would give it to those who had earned it, who saw it not as their birthright, but as an opportunity. A few months after the sentencing, a letter arrived. It had a postmark from a correctional facility in Alaska. I recognized Tyler's handwriting on the envelope immediately. For a long time, I just held it, the thin paper feeling heavy in my hand. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened, but I knew I had to read it. I needed to see it through to the very end. The letter inside was 4 pages long, filled with his cramped, angry scrawl. It was a masterpiece of self-pity and manipulative remorse. He was sorry, he said. But it was the pressure I had put on him. He was sorry, but I had never understood him. He was sorry, but he had been desperate. It was filled with excuses, not reasons. He never once took full, unequivocal responsibility for his choice. The final paragraph was a plea. He was my son. He wrote, he was my only family. He hoped that one day I could find it in my heart to forgive him. I read the letter twice, just to be sure. There was no epiphany, no flicker of the boy I once knew. There was only the whining of a spoiled child who had finally been told no in the harshest way imaginable. I walked over to the fireplace in my new, small living room. I switched it on, and a line of blue and orange flames flickered to life. I held the letter, his final, pathetic attempt to control the narrative, and I dropped it into the fire. I watched as the edges curled and blackened, the ink of his self-serving words turning to gray ash and then to nothing at all. Some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals cut too deep. Some relationships, once broken, can never be put back together. The following weekend, I drove out to the cemetery where Elara was buried. It was a crisp, clear autumn day. I laid a small bouquet of her favorite flowers, yellow roses, on the cool granite of her headstone. I stood there for a long time, the quiet of the place settling around me. I kept my promise. Elara, I said softly, the words carried away by the gentle breeze. I took care of our boy, not in the way we planned, and certainly not in the way we dreamed. I protected him from himself. The only way I had left, I think you'd understand. I told her about the scholarship fund, how her name would now be a symbol of hope and second chances for young people who deserved it, how her legacy wouldn't be a son who took everything for granted, but a generation of hardworking kids who would build their own lives with their own two hands. There was no victory in what had happened, only a deep, abiding sorrow for what was lost. But in its place, something new was being built. Tyler tried to kill me for my money, but in doing so, he had accidentally given me something far more valuable, a purpose. My life was no longer about accumulating wealth for a son who didn't deserve it. It was about giving back, about honoring the memory of the woman I loved by creating opportunities for others. My life is keener now. Simpler. This morning, I was at a local community college, volunteering in their automotive program. I was helping a young woman named Maria, a single mother trying to build a better life for her daughter. Her hands were stained with grease, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to diagnose a faulty alternator. I showed her a trick with a multimeter, and when she finally found the bad diode, her face lit up with a brilliant, triumphant smile. It was a smile of pure, honest accomplishment, a smile of someone who understood the value of hard work. In that moment, watching her, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I smiled back. A real, genuine smile. The past was a ghost, and the future was an open road. And for the first time in a very long time, I was ready to see where it would take me.